Kang Minho stared at the datapad in his hands and felt his stomach drop. The numbers made no sense, and that worried him more than he wanted to admit. He worked as a diplomatic attaché for the Altarian embassy on the central station, and his job was simple enough. He processed trade agreements and cultural exchange documents between different alien species. Nothing exciting and nothing dangerous, just paperwork and meetings that lasted too long. But today was different, because today he found something that should not exist. The file was buried deep in the archives and marked with clearance levels far above his security rating. Minho only found it because of a computer glitch that mixed up his access codes with someone else. The file was titled Former Council Member Species, Sol Sector, and when he opened it, his hands started shaking. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council. 300 years ago, humans sat in the great assembly halls and voted on laws that affected trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. They had trade routes and diplomatic missions and cultural exchange programs, just like every other species. Then one day they simply asked to leave and never came back. The official record said humans requested isolation for internal development. They wanted to focus on improving their own society without outside influence. The Council granted their request and established the boundary around their space. No ships could enter and no signals could leave. It was supposed to be temporary, but 3 centuries had passed and the boundary remained. Minho read through the old documents and found things that made no sense. Human technology levels were listed as equivalent to Council standard, but some notes suggested they were advancing faster than expected. Human psychology reports mentioned unusual neural adaptations and concerning collective behaviors, but gave no details. Most strange of all were the trade records that showed humans exporting massive amounts of rare metals and energy crystals right up until they left. Where did those resources come from, and why did they need so many? Dr. Yunari worked 3 levels down from Minho in the xenobiology labs, and she was asking the same questions. She spent her days studying tissue samples and genetic material from species across the galaxy, but her real interest was in the small collection of human specimens locked away in the high-security storage. Getting access to those samples required special permission and months of paperwork, but Nari was patient. When she finally got approval to examine human genetic material, she discovered something incredible. Human DNA showed signs of recent evolutionary pressure. Not the slow changes that happened over millions of years, but rapid adaptations that occurred in just a few thousand years. Their neural tissue was particularly interesting because it showed structures that did not exist in any other known species. Humans had evolved specialized brain regions that seemed designed for processing multiple information streams simultaneously. Their nervous systems could handle data loads that would overwhelm most other sapient beings. Even more puzzling were the microscopic organic structures throughout their neural tissue that looked almost like biological communication networks. Nari wrote report after report requesting permission to study these findings further, but her requests were always denied. The review board said her research was not aligned with current council priorities and suggested she focus on more practical applications of xenobiology. When she tried to publish her preliminary findings, the papers were rejected without explanation. Someone did not want anyone studying human biology too closely. The warning beacons around human space transmitted the same message every hour of every day. This sector is restricted by Council Mandate 7745. No vessels are permitted to enter. No communication attempts will be acknowledged. Violation of this boundary may result in permanent vessel impoundment. The message was broadcast in 17 different languages and had not changed in 300 years. Park Ji-ho knew the message by heart because he flew cargo routes that skirted the edge of human space twice a month. His ship, the Lucky Dragon, carried trade goods between the outer rim colonies and the core worlds. It was not glamorous work, but it paid well enough to keep his small crew fed and his ship running. Ji-ho was a practical man who followed the rules and stayed out of trouble. He had no interest in forbidden sectors or ancient mysteries. He just wanted to deliver his cargo on time and collect his payment. But sometimes the universe had other plans. The navigation computer started acting strange 3 days out from Vega Station. Small errors in the hyperspace calculations that Ji-ho corrected without thinking much about it. By the second day, the errors were getting bigger and the computer was having trouble maintaining stable jump coordinates. His engineer, Doc Sunwoo, suggested they drop out of hyperspace and run full diagnostics, but they were already behind schedule. On the third day, everything went wrong at once. The hyperspace jump that should have taken them to the Centauri trade hub instead dropped them into normal space at the edge of a system they did not recognize. The navigation computer was completely scrambled and showed their position as unknown. Even worse, the long-range sensors were detecting automated warning beacons nearby. They had jumped into human space. Jiho felt panic rise in his throat as he stared at the sensor readings. The warning beacons were broadcasting their familiar message, but something else was happening too. His ship's systems were shutting down one by one without any explanation. First the weapons went offline, then the communication array, then the main engines. Only life support and basic sensors remained active. Sunwoo was frantically working at the engineering console trying to restart their systems, but nothing responded. The ship's computer showed green lights across all status boards, but none of the equipment would function. It was as if something was remotely controlling their vessel, and there was nothing they could do about it. Then the Lucky Dragon started moving. Without engine power and without any input from the crew, the ship began accelerating toward the inner system. Jiho watched helplessly as they passed the warning beacons and continued deeper into forbidden space. The acceleration was gentle but constant, and whatever was pulling them knew exactly where it wanted them to go. Hours passed, and Jiho's small crew could only watch as strange readings appeared on their sensors. Massive structures that were too regular to be natural, and energy signatures unlike anything in the galactic databases. The inner system was clearly inhabited, but by what they could not tell. As they approached what looked like a small moon, their sensors detected something impossible. The object was not a moon at all, but an artificial structure larger than most space stations. It was perfectly spherical and made from materials that did not appear on any of their scanners. Most disturbing of all, it seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. The Lucky Dragon was drawn into a docking bay that opened like a flower as they approached. The bay was filled with soft blue light, and the air inside registered as breathable for most oxygen-breathing species. As soon as their ship touched down, all their systems came back online, but the docking bay doors had already sealed behind them. They were trapped inside a human facility, and after 300 years of isolation, no one in the galaxy knew what humans had become. Jiho looked at his crew and saw his own fear reflected in their faces. They were about to become the first aliens in 3 centuries to meet humans face to face, and they had no idea what to expect. The official record said humans had requested isolation for peaceful development, but the technology they had just witnessed suggested something far more advanced and potentially dangerous. Whatever humans had been working on for the past 300 years, they were about to find out. Park Jiho woke up in his own bed aboard the Lucky Dragon, but something was different. The familiar hum of the life support system sounded wrong, and the gravity felt lighter than normal. When he checked his chronometer, he realized he had been unconscious for nearly 6 hours, but he could not remember falling asleep. His crew was already awake and gathered in the main corridor looking confused and worried. Engineer Doc Sunwoo was running diagnostics on his personal scanner and shaking his head at the readings. Navigator Kim Hyun-soo kept checking and rechecking their position, but the computers showed only question marks. Even their medic, Dr. Lee, Ji-won seemed unsettled as she examined the strange readings from their environmental systems. The ship's intercom crackled to life and a voice spoke in perfect galactic standard. "Attention crew of the vessel Lucky Dragon. Please report to the main airlock for processing. You are in no danger, but compliance is required for your safety and the safety of others." The voice was clearly human, but it sounded different from the old recordings in the council archives. There was something in the tone that suggested vast knowledge and patience. It was the voice of someone who had seen much and understood even more. Jiho gathered his courage and responded through the comm system. "This is Captain Park Jiho. We entered your space by accident due to navigation malfunction. We request permission to leave immediately." "Captain Park, your request has been noted and will be addressed after processing. Please report to the main airlock. Delay may result in complications." The words were polite but firm, and Jiho understood there was no choice in the matter. He and his crew made their way to the airlock and found it already cycling open. Beyond, The threshold was a corridor made from the same strange material as the docking bay. The walls seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they existed in more than 3 dimensions. They were met by a human woman wearing a simple gray uniform without any visible rank insignia. She was tall and moved with fluid grace that suggested enhanced physical conditioning. Her eyes were the most striking feature because they seemed to hold depths of knowledge that should not fit in one person. "I am Commander Lee Sora. Welcome to Processing Station Omega. You are the first non-human visitors we have received in quite some time." Jiho studied her face and realized she looked exactly like humans in the old records. Whatever changes humans had undergone were not physical, at least not obviously so. "Commander, we apologize for the intrusion. Our navigation systems malfunctioned and brought us here by accident. We are aware of the circumstances, Captain Park. Your ship's systems were compromised by proximity to our dimensional anchoring fields. This is why we maintain the boundary zones around our space." She led them through corridors that seemed to stretch further than they should given the size of the station they had observed from outside. The walls were lined with displays, showing information in languages Jiho did not recognize and symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Where are we exactly?" Dr. Lee asked as they walked. "You are in a processing facility designed to evaluate visitors and determine appropriate responses. We have protocols for handling accidental incursions that have been refined over many years." They entered a large chamber filled with equipment that looked nothing like any technology in the galactic databases. Smooth surfaces without visible. Controls projected holographic displays that responded to gestures and thoughts. The air itself seemed alive with energy that made their hair stand on end. Commander Lee Sora noticed their amazement and smiled slightly. "You are surprised by our technology level. The Council records indicate we were equivalent to galactic standard when we departed." "The records are 300 years old," Navigator Kim said carefully. "Indeed. We have not been idle during our isolation." A man in similar gray clothing approached their group. He was younger than the commander, but carried himself with the same quiet confidence. When he spoke, his voice had the same depth of knowledge that seemed common among these humans. "I am Engineer Choi Wook. I will be conducting your technical evaluation." He gestured toward what looked like an empty wall, and suddenly a 3-dimensional display appeared, showing detailed schematics of the Lucky Dragon. Every system and component was visible down to the molecular level, including modifications and repairs that had been made over the years. "Your vessel shows signs of quantum resonance exposure consistent with proximity to our facilities. We will need to recalibrate your drive systems before you can safely return to normal space." Sunwoo stared at the display in amazement. "How did you scan our ship so thoroughly? Our hulls are made from sensor-resistant materials." Choi Wook waved his hand, and the display zoomed in on the Lucky Dragon's engine core. "Quantum barriers are ineffective against dimensional phase scanning. Your drive systems operate on principles we mastered decades ago." He made another gesture, and the wall display showed the engine core disassembling itself piece by piece. Each component was labeled with efficiency ratings and improvement suggestions. The level of detail was impossible given the scanning time available. "We could increase your engine efficiency by 37% with minor modifications, too." "The quantum resonance chambers," Choi Wook continued casually. "Your current configuration is stable but suboptimal." Dr. Lee stepped forward with her medical scanner active. "Are you reading any unusual energy signatures from these humans?" Before she could complete her scan, Commander Lee Sora held up her hand. "Doctor, your equipment will not provide accurate readings here. Our biological systems have adapted to our technological environment in ways your instruments cannot measure." "What kind of adaptations?" Dr. Lee asked. Instead of answering Commander Lee, Sora looked directly at Engineer Choi Wook, who was standing 30 meters away with his back turned. Without any visible communication between them, he immediately turned around and approached their group. "How did you signal him?" Navigator Kim asked. "We did not signal in any way you would recognize," Commander Lee Sora replied. Another human appeared at the far end of the chamber. She was older than the others and wore clothing that suggested senior rank or specialized function. She walked toward them with purpose, but stopped to examine something at a control station along the way. "Dr. Kim Hana is our head researcher," Commander Lee Sora explained. "She has been expecting your arrival." "Expecting our arrival? We told you this was an accident." Dr. Kim Hana looked up from her workstation and spoke without moving closer to their group. Captain Park, your navigation malfunction was caused by interaction between your quantum drive and our dimensional monitoring grid. We detected the probability, cascade 6 hours before your arrival, and prepared accordingly. Jiho felt his understanding of the situation shift in uncomfortable ways. You knew we were coming before we even had the malfunction? We observe quantum probability streams as a matter of routine. Your arrival was one of several possible outcomes we calculated and prepared for. She gestured toward the displays around the chamber, which suddenly showed star charts and trajectory analyses. Multiple colored lines showed different paths the Lucky Dragon could have taken, and all of them led to this station. Your ship's quantum signature indicates you have been operating near the boundary zones for several months. Each pass increased the probability of dimensional interference until malfunction became inevitable. Navigator Kim studied the probability charts with growing alarm. Are you saying our regular cargo runs have been affecting your monitoring grid? Correct. Your route takes you through areas where normal space intersects with dimensional fold points we use for observation purposes. Engineer Choi Wook activated another display showing the entire galaxy with thousands of tiny points of light scattered across its surface. We maintain monitoring stations throughout galactic space to track various phenomena. Your shipping lane passes through 17 of these locations. The implications hit Jiho like cold water. You have been watching the galaxy this entire time. The isolation was fake. Commander Lee Sora exchanged glances with Dr. Kim Hana and Engineer Choi Wook. The look they shared lasted only a moment, but Jiho got the distinct impression they were communicating in ways he could not detect. Captain Park, the situation is more complex than simple observation. We withdrew from galactic society for reasons that were necessary at the time and remain necessary now. What reasons? There are threats to galactic civilization that the Council either cannot or will not acknowledge. We have taken responsibility for monitoring and containing these threats. Dr. Kim Hana approached their group and activated a portable display device. The hologram showed what looked like ships, but their design was unlike anything in the galactic databases. They were organic-looking and seemed to shift and change as they moved. These vessels appear randomly throughout galactic space. They attack other ships, disable their crews, and disappear before anyone can respond. The Council classifies them as pirates or terrorists, but they are something far worse. The images showed the aftermath of these attacks. Ships found drifting in space with crews that were alive but completely unresponsive. No physical damage to the vessels and no signs of struggle. Just empty-eyed people who no longer seemed to be fully present. What happened to the crews? Dr. Lee asked. Something was taken from them, something fundamental to consciousness itself. Commander Lee Sora led them through another series of corridors that seemed to bend and twist in ways that made no geometric sense. Park Jiho tried to map their route, but gave up when they passed the same junction 3 times while walking in, a straight line. The station existed according to rules of physics that were different from anything he understood. They entered what looked like an observation deck with massive transparent walls showing the space around the station. Jiho expected to see stars and empty void, but instead found himself looking at something impossible. Dozens of ships hung in space around them, but they were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The vessels were sleek and organic-looking, with hulls that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. They had no visible engines or weapons, but energy readings from the station's sensors showed they were incredibly powerful. Most disturbing of all was the way they seemed to flicker, in and out of existence as if they were not entirely present in normal space. "Welcome to the home fleet," Commander Lee Sora said quietly. "These ships have been protecting the galaxy for 3 centuries. A new voice spoke from behind them, and Jiho turned to see another human approaching. This one wore a different style of uniform with markings that suggested high rank. He was older than the others, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of long years making difficult decisions. "I am Admiral Song Taemin. Captain Park, you and your crew are about to learn things that will change how you see the universe." "They are." Admiral gestured toward the ships outside, and the view changed to show dozens more vessels appearing from what looked like empty space. They materialized without warning and disappeared just as quickly, but Jiho could see they were arranged in defensive formations around the station. "Our ships exist partially outside normal spacetime. Admiral Song explained. This allows us to patrol areas of the galaxy without being detected by conventional sensors. Engineer Doc Sunwoo was staring at his scanner in confusion. Sir, I am not reading any engine signatures from those vessels. How do they move? They move through folded space using principles your science has not yet discovered. Distance and time become flexible concepts when you understand how to manipulate dimensional barriers. Another human woman appeared on the observation deck, wearing a uniform with different insignia. She was younger than the Admiral, but carried herself with the same quiet authority that seemed common among these people. Captain Bei Yuna commands our patrol fleets, Admiral Song said. She can show you what we have been fighting. Captain Bei activated a holographic display that filled the center of the observation deck. The images showed battles in deep space, between human ships and the strange organic vessels they had seen earlier. But these recordings revealed details that the previous displays had not shown. The enemy ships were not just attacking randomly. They were hunting something specific, and their movements followed patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. When they encountered civilian vessels, they did not simply destroy them. Instead, they did something that was much worse. Watch carefully, Captain Bei said, as the display zoomed in on one of the attacks. The enemy vessel approached a cargo hauler and extended what looked like tendrils of dark energy. The tendrils passed through the cargo ship's hull without causing any physical damage, but the crew inside began to change. Their movements became slow and jerky, like puppets being controlled by invisible strings. The entities we call void feeders do not destroy their victims, Captain Bei explained. They consume something much more valuable. They feed on consciousness itself. The display showed the cargo ship after the attack. The hull was intact and all systems were functional, but when rescue teams boarded, they found crew members who were alive but empty. They could perform basic functions like eating and breathing, but they no longer seemed to be truly present. What happens to the consciousness that gets consumed? Dr. Lee asked. We believe it becomes part of the Void Feeder Collective. Each victim adds to their knowledge and capabilities. Admiral Song activated another display showing star charts with incident reports scattered across the galaxy. For 300 years, these attacks have been increasing in frequency and sophistication. The Council classifies them as unexplained accidents or pirate activity because they cannot detect the true cause. Jiho studied the patterns and realized something disturbing. The attacks are concentrated along major trade routes and near populated systems. Correct. The void feeders are systematically harvesting consciousness from the most developed species in the galaxy. Captain Bei changed the display to show recent battle footage. Human ships engaged the void feeders using weapons that seemed to fire concentrated light rather than physical projectiles. The beams passed through normal matter but caused the organic enemy vessels to writhe and retreat. How do you fight something that exists partially outside normal space? Navigator Kim asked. We learn to fight them the same way they fight us, by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The human woman gestured, and suddenly Jiho could see her differently. She was still standing in front of them, but he could also perceive her as existing in several other locations at the same time. The sensation was disorienting and made his head ache. Human consciousness has evolved to operate across dimensional boundaries, Admiral Song explained. This allows us to detect and engage the void feeders when they attack. Dr. Lee was scanning the humans with her medical equipment, but the readings made no sense. Your neural activity is showing patterns I have never seen before. It is as if your brains are operating in multiple states simultaneously. That is essentially correct. We can share thoughts and experiences directly without technology. We can perceive threats that exist outside normal space-time. Most importantly, we can coordinate our actions across vast distances instantaneously. The implications were staggering. Humans had not just developed advanced technology during their isolation. They had evolved into something beyond what any other species had achieved. A new voice spoke from the air around them without any visible source. Admiral Song, we have detected multiple void feeder incursions in the outer rim sectors. They appear to be coordinating a large-scale assault. Admiral Song replied to the invisible speaker without using any communication device. Understood. Deploy Third Fleet to intercept. Coordinate with Professor O's research team for dimensional analysis. Jiho realized he had just witnessed humans communicating through their evolved consciousness abilities. How many of you are connected this way? All of us, Commander Lee Sora said simply. Human consciousness has become collective while remaining individual. We can share knowledge and coordinate actions across our entire species when necessary. The observation deck displays changed to show real-time footage from across the galaxy. Human ships that were invisible to normal sensors engaged void feeder vessels in dozens of different systems. The scale of the hidden war was enormous. This is why we withdrew from galactic society, Admiral Song said. Our evolution made us capable of fighting the void feeders, but it also made us different in ways that other species found threatening. The Council was afraid of us, Captain Bay added. They saw our developing abilities as a potential threat to the existing order. So you agreed to isolation to protect both yourselves and the galaxy, Jiho said. We agreed to official isolation while maintaining our real responsibility. We became the galaxy's hidden guardians. The displays showed more battle footage and Jiho began to understand the true scope of what humans had been doing. Every mysterious ship malfunction and unexplained crew loss had been a void feeder attack that humans had tried to prevent or contain. For 3 centuries, they had been fighting a war that the rest of the galaxy did not even know existed. Why are you telling us this? Navigator Kim asked. Admiral Song and Captain Bay exchanged one of their silent communications before answering. Because the situation is changing. The void feeders are preparing for something larger than individual attacks. The main display shifted to show intelligence gathered from captured void feeder vessels. The organic ships were massing in areas outside the galaxy's spiral arms. Thousands of them gathered in formations that suggested preparation for coordinated invasion. We have been fighting defensive actions for 3 centuries, Professor O'Jimin said as she appeared on the observation deck. Our mathematical models indicate the void feeders are planning a simultaneous assault on every major population center in the galaxy. When? Jiho asked. Within the next few months. They have been studying galactic civilization through their captured victims, and they now understand our weaknesses well enough to exploit them. The truth was finally clear. Humans had not abandoned the galaxy. They had sacrificed their place in galactic society to become its protectors. But their hidden war was about to become very public, and the galaxy was not prepared for what was coming. What do you need from us? Jiho asked. Admiral Song smiled grimly. We need you to convince the Galactic Council that the threat is real, and that they must work with us to survive what is coming. The journey back to Central Station took 3 days, but for Park Jiho, it felt like 3 years. His ship had been modified with human technology that allowed it to travel through folded space, but the experience was deeply unsettling. Reality seemed to bend and stretch around them in ways that made his crew nervous and sick. When they finally arrived at the massive orbital complex that served as the galactic government's headquarters, Jiho felt like he was seeing it with new eyes. The bustling trade levels and diplomatic quarters that had once seemed impressive now looked primitive compared to what he had witnessed in human space. His first priority was requesting an emergency session with the Galactic Council, but the bureaucratic process was slow and frustrating. Junior officials wanted to know why a cargo captain needed to address the full assembly, and they were not satisfied with his explanation that he had urgent information about galactic security. It took 2 days of persistence and several bribes to minor functionaries before Jiho finally got an appointment with someone who could actually make decisions. Counselor Thek was a mid-level administrator from the Procyon system who handled unusual requests and potential security threats. Captain Park, your request for an emergency session is highly irregular, Counselor Thek said as he reviewed Jiho's paperwork. You claim to have information about threats to galactic civilization, but you provide no evidence or supporting documentation. Sir, the evidence is too sensitive to put in written reports. I need to address the full council directly. That is impossible without proper authorization from your planetary government or sponsoring organization. Independent cargo captains, do not address the council. Jiho felt his frustration growing. Then who can I talk to about threats that could destroy every civilization in the galaxy? If you have information about criminal activity, you should contact the Council Security Division. If you have concerns about trade route safety, you should speak with the Commerce Commission. It was becoming clear that the bureaucratic system was not designed to handle the kind of information Jiho carried. The Council operated according to established procedures that assumed all threats would come through normal channels and follow predictable patterns. While Jiho struggled with the Council bureaucracy, Dr. Yu Nari was having her own problems on the research levels below. She had returned to her xenobiology lab with new questions about human evolution, but found that her access to human genetic samples had been revoked without explanation. "I am sorry, Dr. Nari, but your research authorization has been suspended pending administrative review," the lab supervisor explained. "All materials related to your human biology project have been secured." "On whose authority?" Nari demanded. "The order came from the Council Science Directorate. No further information is available." Nari realized that someone had been monitoring her research and had moved quickly to shut it down as soon as she started asking uncomfortable questions. The timing suggested that her work was connected to larger issues that certain people wanted to keep hidden. She decided to approach the problem from a different angle and began searching through historical records for information about human departure from galactic society. What she found in the archives contradicted the official story in several important ways. The records showed that human withdrawal from the Council had not been voluntary. There had been heated debates about human evolution, and several species had expressed concerns about the rapid changes in human society. References to uncontrolled biological development and potential consciousness manipulation appeared in classified files from that time period. Most revealing were the medical reports from the final human diplomatic missions. Council physicians had noted unusual neural activity patterns in human delegates and recommended psychological evaluation. The humans had refused such evaluation, citing species sovereignty, and had withdrawn from negotiations shortly afterward. They were not asked to leave, Nari realized as she read through the documents. They were driven out because other species were afraid of what they were becoming. Meanwhile, Kang Minho was conducting his own investigation into the administrative side of human isolation. His access to diplomatic archives allowed him to examine the actual council vote that had established the boundary around human space. What he discovered was deeply disturbing. The vote had not been unanimous, as the public records claimed. Several species had opposed the isolation protocol and had warned that cutting contact with humans could have negative consequences. Their concerns had been overruled by a coalition of more powerful council members who viewed human evolution as a threat to galactic stability. "Fear," Minho muttered as he read through the classified voting records. They isolated humans because they were afraid. More troubling were the incident reports from the years following human isolation. Ships that approached the boundary zones reported system malfunctions and crew behavioral anomalies. Several vessels had been found drifting with crews that showed signs of consciousness alteration, but the reports had been classified and never investigated properly. The attacks were happening even then, Minho realized. The void feeders were active 300 years ago, and the Council ignored the evidence. He tried to access more recent incident reports, but found that they had been systematically buried in bureaucratic filing systems. Reports of unexplained crew losses and mysterious ship malfunctions were scattered across dozens of different departments and classified under various unrelated categories. The pattern was clear. Someone had been deliberately hiding evidence of void feeder attacks for centuries. Park Jiho's breakthrough came when he encountered an elderly alien sitting alone in one of Central Station's quiet observation lounges. The being was humanoid, but clearly not from any species Jiho recognized. When their eyes met, the stranger gestured for him to approach. "You have the look of someone carrying heavy knowledge," the stranger said in accented galactic standard. "I have information that could save the galaxy, but no one will listen to me. Perhaps that is because you are speaking to the wrong people. I am Lim Seung-ho, and I may be the only being on this station who will believe your story." Jiho felt something familiar about the name, but could not place it until the stranger continued speaking. 300 years ago, I served as humanity's final representative to the Galactic Council. I have been waiting a very long time for someone to bring news from my people." The revelation hit Jiho like a physical blow. "You are human?" "I am what?" "Humans were before we evolved beyond the galaxy's comfort level. I chose to remain behind when my people withdrew from galactic society." Lim Seung-ho led Jiho to a private meeting room where they could speak without being overheard. The elderly human looked tired in a way that suggested centuries of carrying difficult secrets. My people asked me to stay and monitor the situation from within Council Society. I have spent 300 years watching and waiting while filing. Reports that no one reads. Reports about what? About the attacks that the Council refuses to acknowledge. About the ships that disappear with their crews intact but empty. About the growing threat that will eventually consume every conscious being in the galaxy. Jiho realized he had found the ally he needed. The Void Feeders are preparing for a massive invasion. The humans who saved my crew said it could happen within months. I know. I have been tracking the escalation pattern for decades. The attacks are becoming more frequent and coordinated. Lim Sung-ho activated a hidden data storage device that projected classified information into the air between them. The display showed incident reports from across the galaxy documenting unexplained crew losses and ship malfunctions going back centuries. I have been compiling evidence for 300 years. Every attack that the Council classifies as piracy or accident. Every crew that was found alive but empty. Every ship that suffered mysterious system failures near the galactic rim. The scope of the hidden war became clear as Jiho studied the data. Thousands of incidents spread across hundreds of systems, with the frequency increasing dramatically in recent decades. Why has no one connected the patterns? Because the evidence is deliberately scattered across different departments and classification levels. No single person has access to enough information to see the bigger picture. Except you. Except me. And now you. Lim Sung-ho deactivated the display and looked directly at Jiho. Captain Park, your arrival means the situation has reached a critical point. My people would not reveal themselves unless the final phase was beginning. What do? We force the Council to listen. I still have emergency powers as a former human representative. Powers that I have never used, but which remain legally valid. The old humans stood with sudden energy and purpose. It is time to break 3 centuries of silence and tell the galaxy the truth about what is coming. At that moment, alarms began sounding throughout Central Station, and emergency broadcasts started playing on every communication channel. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of ships found drifting with crews that were alive but unresponsive. The Void Feeder invasion had begun. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours as reports flooded in from across known space. Over 200 ships had been found drifting with crews that were alive but completely unresponsive. The scale of simultaneous attacks was unprecedented, and panic was spreading through the galactic communication networks. Lim Sung-ho used his ancient diplomatic credentials to gain access to the council chambers where he had not set foot for 3 centuries. The other representatives stared at him in shock as he took his place at the human delegation table that had remained empty for so long. Honorable representatives, the council speaker began uncertainly, we face an unprecedented crisis with ships across the galaxy suffering simultaneous crew incapacitation. Before we begin emergency deliberations, we note the presence of Lim Sung-ho representing the human territories. Murmurs filled the chamber as delegates whispered among themselves. Many had never seen a human before, and those who had remembered them from historical records rather than personal experience. Speaker of the Council, Lim Sung-ho said as he stood, I request permission to address the Assembly on matters directly related to the current crisis. The chair recognizes the human representative. Lim Sung-ho activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The images showed 3 centuries of incident reports compiled from across galactic space. Ships found with empty-eyed crews, mysterious system failures, unexplained behavioral changes in surviving personnel. Honorable delegates, what you are experiencing today is not a new phenomenon. These attacks have been occurring for over 300 years, but they have been hidden from your attention by bureaucratic compartmentalization and willful ignorance. Angry voices erupted from several delegations, but the speaker called for order. The entities responsible for these attacks exist partially outside normal space-time. They feed on consciousness itself and have been systematically harvesting sapient minds from across the galaxy. The display changed to show footage from human monitoring stations of void feeder vessels attacking civilian ships. The organic appearance of the enemy vessels and their ability to phase in and out of normal space drew gasps of amazement from the assembled delegates. The human withdrawal from galactic society 3 centuries ago was not voluntary isolation. We evolved the ability to detect and fight these entities, but our new capabilities frightened you into driving us away. More angry protests arose, but Lim Sung-ho continued speaking over them. We accepted exile rather than abandon our responsibility to protect the galaxy. For 300 years, we have fought a hidden war to contain these threats, while you remained ignorant of the danger. The council chamber erupted in chaos as delegates shouted questions and accusations. Some demanded proof, while others called for Lim Sung-ho to be removed from the chamber. The speaker struggled to maintain order as centuries of hidden truth spilled into the open. At that moment, the main communication console received an incoming transmission that automatically override all other signals. The image of Admiral Song Taemin appeared in the center of the chamber, causing shocked silence to fall over the assembly. Delegates of the Galactic Council, I am Admiral Song Taemin of the Human Defense Fleet. Our monitoring stations have detected the beginning of a coordinated void feeder invasion targeting every major population center in known space. The Admiral's image was joined by tactical displays showing enemy formations massing at the edge of galactic space. Thousands of organic vessels were moving toward populated systems in coordinated groups that suggested careful planning and preparation. The attacks you have experienced today are preliminary strikes designed to test your defenses and gather intelligence. The main invasion will begin within hours, and your current military capabilities are insufficient to resist it. Angry delegates demanded to know how humans had hidden such advanced technology and monitoring capabilities. Others accused humans of staging the attacks themselves to manipulate the council. We offer our assistance in defending galactic civilization, Admiral Song continued calmly, but we require your cooperation and trust. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in uproar. Some delegates demanded immediate military action against human territories, while others called for investigation of the claims about consciousness feeding entities. Park Ji-ho stood from the observer gallery where he had been watching the proceedings. I can verify everything you have just heard. I have seen human technology and witnessed their battles against these creatures. Dr. Yunari also stood from her position in the scientific observer section. My research into human biology confirms they have evolved capabilities that would allow them to detect and fight entities existing in multiple dimensions. Kang Min-ho rose from the diplomatic staff area. The archival records support the claims about hidden attacks and bureaucratic cover-ups. The evidence has been available but deliberately obscured. The 3 of them had coordinated their testimony to provide corroborating evidence from different perspectives. Their combined witness began to sway some of the more moderate delegates, who were willing to consider the possibility that the human claims were true. The debate continued for hours, but was interrupted by another wave of emergency reports. More ships were being found with incapacitated crews, and several space stations reported personnel beginning to show signs of consciousness alteration. The attacks were escalating rapidly. General Jeon Min-jae materialized in the council chamber, using the same dimensional technology that allowed human ships to move undetected. Her sudden appearance caused security forces to draw weapons, but she made no threatening moves. Delegates, the invasion has entered its active phase. Void feeder vessels are approaching 17 major systems simultaneously. We estimate you have less than 6 hours before the attacks reach core world populations. She activated a portable display showing real-time tactical information from across the galaxy. Human ships were engaging enemy vessels in dozens of systems, but they were vastly outnumbered. We can teach your military forces to fight these entities, but the process requires direct consciousness interface with human personnel. Your people must be willing to temporarily link their minds with ours. The suggestion caused another eruption of debate. Many delegates viewed the idea of consciousness linking as a form of mental invasion or control. Others worried about the long-term effects of such procedures. Dr. An So-min appeared beside General Jeon using the same dimensional transport technology. The consciousness interface is temporary and completely reversible. It allows non-human minds to perceive dimensional threats and coordinate responses effectively. She demonstrated by establishing a brief link with Dr. Nari, who had volunteered to participate. For a few moments, Nari could see the chamber as humans saw it, with additional dimensional layers visible and multiple probability streams showing possible outcomes. "It works!" Nari gasped as the link ended. I could see things that are normally invisible and understand spatial relationships that my brain cannot normally process. The demonstration convinced several key delegates, but others remained suspicious. The debate might have continued for hours, but was cut short by urgent reports from the outer systems. The first major void feeder assault had begun at the Centauri colonies. Within minutes, the orbital defense platforms went silent, and civilian ships started broadcasting distress calls before falling quiet. The invasion was no longer theoretical. Emergency powers were invoked, and the Council authorized immediate cooperation with human forces. The formal vote was close, but fear of the approaching threat overcame centuries of suspicion and prejudice. Ambassador Quan Yunji coordinated the massive consciousness-linking operation that connected human minds with volunteers from dozens of species across the galaxy. The mental network allowed real-time coordination between defense forces, separated by thousands of light-years. Fleet Commander Yoon Ji-hoon led the combined human and alien forces in the final battle that took place, simultaneously across hundreds of systems. The linked consciousness network allowed perfect coordination and tactical awareness that the void feeders had not anticipated. The enemy had evolved to fight isolated minds, but they could not adapt quickly enough to resist the combined mental strength of multiple species working in perfect harmony. After 6 days of fighting, the void feeder invasion was defeated, and their remaining vessels retreated to unknown space beyond the galactic rim. The aftermath brought changes that transformed galactic civilization. Humans rejoined the Council not as equals, but as protectors with special responsibilities for monitoring dimensional threats. The boundary around human space remained, but now served as a training ground where other species learned to develop their own consciousness evolution. Dr. Yu Nari established the Institute for Consciousness Studies, where volunteers from many species worked to develop mental abilities that could defend against future interdimensional threats. Kang Minho became the first alien ambassador to the human territories and helped establish new protocols for cooperation between evolved and conventional minds. Park Ji-ho continued flying cargo routes, but now his ship carried human technology that allowed him to detect dimensional anomalies and report potential threats.